Hello, welcome to ShropshireStar.com. My name is Jonny Drury. I'm here opposite Salop correspondent for the Star, Ollie Westbury, to bring you a Shrewsbury Town update. Really, just a bit of reaction to what's been going on over the last week or so. The last time we spoke, Steve Cottrell departed the now Crowd Meadow. I was going to say the Montgomery Waters Meadow there, Ollie, but now called the Crowd Meadow. Since then, we've now heard from new director of football, Micky Moore, for the first time, really, an extensive interview with the club. He's outlined the head coach search, given an update on that, and talked about various other parts of the football club. And that's where we'll start, really, Ollie, among other news. That was released by Salop sort of late last week. What did you make of the interview and what Micky Moore said, sort of as a whole? We'll come on to a few specific points in a second, but what did you make of it? Good to hear from the man who's going to be making the key decisions at Salop now.
Yeah, no, it was. I'm glad that we've kind of had some communication and some good stuff coming out of the club. I think there was a lot of good stuff that Micky Moore said. And yeah, I'm looking forward to having a chance to sit down. Obviously, it wasn't a press. Wasn't a meeting with the press, so like myself and the BBC weren't there. It was just a club interview. So hoping that I'll get the opportunity to speak to Micky myself soon and to meet him. But yeah, I think a lot of the stuff that he said was really interesting, and I really like the idea of trying to sign some young up and coming players. I thought he came across quite well, quite knowledgeable, but I think these things are always the same whenever like a manager's unveiled or whether a director of football's unveiled. It's always a case of they can come across well, but it doesn't really matter really. It's kind of what happens now, and I suppose the phrase is the proof will be in the pudding. That's the phrase, isn't it? And I've kind of been to many of these managerial unveilings or first interviews and gone, oh yeah, that was impressive, really, really impressive, came across really well. The one that sticks out for me is when me and you went to Steve Bruce's unveiling. He looked really, really impressive, and before you know it, he'd been sacked. So you never know, do you, what future this is actually what it means. But he said all the right things, and that's all you can do, really.
Exactly. Proof will be in the pudding. Proof will be in the pudding with his first big decision, which is going to be the new Salop head coach. They're going in the head coach role rather than the first team manager role. And he spoke extensively about that. He said he's not going to rush it, wants to get it right. A few interesting points in there, Ollie, that I've picked out of his statement. That's one point he made. He's not going to, he's not going to rush it. He's also said that it could potentially be, someone who's worked in 21's football or 23's football, sort of young and up and coming coach. And he also said there's been a lot of interest, which, that first line of what I've just said there sort of lends itself to think it potentially might be an unknown, really, someone we don't know an awful lot about.
Yeah, I think that is something. It wouldn't surprise me if it's an out-the-box appointment, one that we've not really heard of, one that we're perhaps not expecting. So yeah, as far as timescales are aware, I'm not expecting anything imminent at all. It wouldn't surprise me if it's probably 2 weeks. Is perhaps the time frame that I've got an idea of what I kind of feel about is probably where we're heading. So nothing's imminent. I think a thorough process, which is the right thing to do. Don't get me wrong, it is the right thing to do. To conduct a thorough, because you want to get the right man, don't you? You need to make sure you get the right man for the job. You don't want to rush and make a snapshot decision. So yeah, thorough process is underway, and Micky Moore is well into the swing of things at the Crowd Meadow, and he's a busy man.
Going to take some getting used to, isn't it? The Crowd Meadow.
Crowd Meadow, it sounds weird, doesn't it?
We'll touch on that a little later on. And just a roundup of a few other points elsewhere. There's been a few articles that you've done, Ollie, and deciphering from what the club have put out. Another line is that in terms of sort of new signings, now football fans do get sort of irate when signings don't happen quite quickly. Just to clarify, the transfer window has only just opened today, so I imagine now is when clubs will start to make moves. And things will start to happen. Obviously, Shrewsbury haven't got a head coach at the moment, Ollie. But there was a line in Micky Moore's statement that said, new signings may come in before someone is in place, which some fans might look at as a bit of a sort of not strange strategy, but something that obviously a little bit different from what Salop have done in the past, which this whole strategy is. What did you make of that line?
Yeah, it is. It is an interesting. It is an interesting one with regards to the players and the recruitment of players before. I imagine perhaps what that will do is it'll certainly. Well, I don't know for sure, but I expect that there will be certain players that will want to know who the coach is before they will sign for the club. And I suppose that there will be certain players that, if the terms are good enough and they believe in the vision, that will be happy to sign. I imagine that until the head coach position is sorted, it perhaps will be a barrier for not necessarily for everybody, but there will be some barrier for signing players. And yeah, but this is the position that Shrewsbury are in, I suppose, at the moment. That's where they're at with it. So I've kind of lost track of what I was saying. But yeah, so it's an interesting one, and we'll have to kind of watch this space really. I mean, yeah, for me, it does sound odd to kind of sign players before you've got a manager.
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting strategy, and obviously one that we'll have to see how that develops. Just on a couple of other points before we just look at a few news items that have popped up over the last couple of days. And we've heard a lot in the last couple of weeks since Steve Cottrell, or the last week since Steve Cottrell's departed Salop, regarding budgets and spending, and that dates all the way back to Roland Wycherley's statement at the end of last season. And Micky Moore's also talked about sort of budgetary stuff in his statements. Just want to read out a line here. It says, the chairman has been nice and transparent in terms of the losses the club have made over the last 2 or 3 years, but it is not something that daunts me or frightens me, as I've been doing that for the last 5 years. Ollie, that smacks of, there are going to be tight restrictions on Shrewsbury. Moore is someone who has worked under a budget at Cheltenham and worked relatively well. I'm sure some fans will look at it sort of concerned, but it doesn't sound like the new manager is all too concerned given what he's had to do in the past.
No, I think this is familiar territory for him. From what I gather, when I spoke to John Palmer, he said similar things. Second lowest budget. He was working with the Cheltenham, and I think he said something in there that even though it was the second lowest budget, they'd only spent 11 days in the bottom 4, or however many it is in League One. Didn't have to look at that too much last year. So yeah, it's familiar territory for him. And from what you gather, he's an incredibly hard worker, and that's going to be the case. It's trying to get those players in. But there will be budgetary constraints. The budget wasn't, as far as what we're led to believe, 18th in League One last season. So it wasn't a big playing budget last year. And so, he'll have to compile and make a squad that he believes will be competitive enough in League One this season. And that's just the way it is.
We spoke also about senior players. There's a really nice line in here saying, I think we have an outstanding set of senior players, some really good players and some really good characters. I know a lot about them. And there was a few other things. I think he'd been in contact with people talking about, really praising the senior players already there, the 11 senior players, I think, that are under contract. That'll be something, sort of music to some of these players' ears, won't it, Ollie? It's probably been difficult for them over the last few weeks. I know you reported that a lot of the players were disappointed to see Steve Cottrell leave. You're just reading some of the messages on social media from the likes of sort of Luke Lee, Tom Bayliss, etc. That obviously they'll be now waiting with bated breath to see who the new head coach is. But it's obvious that Salop are in a good position in terms of there are some really quality good players on the contract still, senior players.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're not in. They've still got, I think it's 12 senior players they've got signed up, or it might be 11, that are under contract. And then they've got the youngsters as well, who are probably unlikely to be too involved, apart from without injuries. But so that they do have a nucleus of good senior players, but and don't forget they've got the 5 loan spaces that they will hope to fill at some point as well. So that probably won't be too far away. But I'm really encouraged by the fact that they're looking for young sellable assets. I think it's a good way to go. I think it's a smart recruitment model. It just relies on Micky Moore having a really good eye for a player and having some good contacts, which from the 5 years he spent at Cheltenham and from what he's done, from what you gather and what you hear, is something that, you know, he has got.
Certainly. Just elsewhere before we wrap up this Salop Shropshire Star update, as we said before, the Meadow has got a new name, no longer the Montgomery Waters Meadow. A deal signed with local marketing agency Crowd. It might be called the Crowd Meadow. Take a little bit of getting used to. Bit used to, Ollie. I almost wrote the Montgomery Waters Meadow in an article this morning and had to quickly correct that. But sort of, it's had a few names now, the Meadow. But I'm sure the Salop fans will spend a bit of time getting used to it.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? Well, it feels weird at the moment that it's got a new name. But yeah, still the Meadow for me.
Yeah, still the Meadow for many Salop fans as well. Well, finally, we'll wrap up, Ollie. Your article today on the back page of the Shropshire Star, you know, it's something that Salop fans have probably been expecting for quite a while now. So not confirmation, but Matthew Pennington is expected to leave the club this summer. All Championship clubs really chasing him. Plymouth and Birmingham look like front runners, although League One Portsmouth are said to be interested. Just inevitable, really. Ollie, I know there was an offer on the table, but you know, he's been one of Salop's best performers over the last couple of years. Just almost sort of disappointing a little bit that he's out of contract, really, probably from a Salop point of view, given you know there probably would have still been interest had he been in contract.
Yeah, perhaps they dropped the ball on that one, allowing him to allowing his contract to be run down. It's a real shame. My sources yesterday tell me, I wrote that story yesterday for today, that it was Plymouth and Portsmouth that are in for him. But I have spoken to Alex Dickin this morning from the Birmingham Mail, who's pretty sure the Blues are in for him too. So, you know, there's plenty of interest there. 2 Championship clubs and a League One club. You would have thought that all will offer more competitive wages than Shrewsbury. The one thing that has always been the case with Matthew Pennington is that I believe he's quite settled in the area, and it's never been out of the question that he wouldn't sign. But I would say, you know, with Shrews not having a head coach and, you know, things perhaps being a little bit up in the air at Town at the moment, that, you know, he will probably choose to move on. The Blues one probably makes quite a lot of sense for him in terms of logistically. I mean, Plymouth is miles away. So
as is Portsmouth.
So logistically, if I was Matthew Pennington, I'd be going to Blues just because you probably don't have to move house. But yeah, that's that. But you know, Matthew Pennington's a smashing lad, and I really hope he gets a good move.